Okay, let's unpack this. Our senses, sight, sound, touch, all of them, they're uh, they're how we navigate everything, aren't they?
Absolutely. They keep us grounded, safe, connected.
And for nurses, understanding when something goes wrong with those senses, well, it's absolutely vital for good care, really holistic care.
Couldn't agree more.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into sensory alterations. We're pulling the key stuff straight from Fundamentals of Nursing. That's Potter, Perry, Stockert, and Hall, the 11th edition.
A foundational text?
Exactly. And our mission. It's to give you, the nursing student, the essential insights, the clinical decision-making tips, the practical applications you need to handle sensory changes confidently.
Right, making it real-world relevant.
Yeah. So picture this. Miss Long, she's 70, a widow, loves reading, sewing, or she did. Now she's got this cataract, uncorrected, blurring her vision, and she's terrified of falling, even in her own home. Then you have Diliana, a nursing student. She gets it because she helped her own grandmother after cataract surgery.
That personal connection makes a difference.
Totally. We'll follow their story as we go. So where do we start with understanding sensory alterations?
Well, first we need to get the basics of how sensing even works. Every single sensory experience, it involves three key things: reception, perception, and reaction.
Okay, reception, perception, reaction. Let's break those down. Reception.
Reception is step one. It's when specialized nerve cells, the receptors, get triggered by something specific, like light hitting your eye or sound waves vibrating tiny hairs in your ear.
So the raw data coming in.
Exactly. It's the initial stimulus activating the nerve pathway. Think photoreceptors for light, hair cells for sound.
Great. Raw data collected. Then what? Perception.
Right. Perception is what your brain does with that data. It's the interpretation, becoming aware of the sensation and connecting it to, your past experiences.
So making sense of it.
Precisely. And what's really key here is consciousness. If someone's level of consciousness is down, maybe they're fatigued, or on certain meds, their ability to perceive accurately can be impaired.
That makes sense. Reception, then perception. What's reaction?
Reaction is how we respond. Our brains are smart. They filter constantly to avoid being overwhelmed. Usually, we react to what's most important or meaningful at that moment.
Like tuning out background music when you're reading.
Exactly like that. We
Yeah.
adapt, discard, or store info. But, and this is crucial, pain is the big exception. We typically don't adapt to pain. It demands a reaction.
Right. Pain always gets your attention.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the fundamentals. And besides the big five senses, the source mentioned a couple of others.
It did. The kinesthetic sense, that's your awareness of your body's position and movement without looking, like knowing your arm is raised even with your eyes closed.
Proprioception, basically.
Yeah, related. And then stereognosis, that's recognizing an object just by touch, its size, shape, texture, like finding your keys in your pocket.
Got it. And it also mentioned aphasia.
Yes, as a communication alteration, which can be just as isolating and impactful as a sensory loss, affecting how someone interacts with the world.
Okay, so now that we have the basics, let's talk about when things go wrong. The alterations themselves.
Right. It's really important for you as nurses to differentiate between the three main types: sensory deficits, sensory deprivation, and sensory overload. They need different approaches.
Okay, let's start with sensory deficits. What defines that?
A sensory deficit is a problem in the normal function of receiving or perceiving stimuli. It's a direct impairment, like vision loss or hearing loss.
Like Miss Long's cataract.
Exactly. And the key nursing insight here is how people cope. Some ways are adaptive, like turning your good ear towards someone speaking.
Makes sense.
But watch for maladaptive behaviors. Someone might avoid social events because they're embarrassed about not hearing well. That really impacts their quality of life.
What are some common examples of deficits we see?
Well, for vision, besides cataracts causing blurriness and glare, there's presbyopia, that age-related difficulty focusing up close. Super common.
My parents complain about that constantly.
Right. For hearing, presbycusis is that gradual hearing loss in older adults. They often struggle with high-pitched sounds or consonants like S, T, F, G.
And you mentioned that can be mistaken for something else.
Yes, crucially, sometimes older adults with hearing loss get misdiagnosed with dementia because they have trouble following conversations, which can look like confusion.
Wow, that's a huge point for assessment. What about other senses?
Tactile deficits like peripheral neuropathy, numbness, tingling often from diabetes, or carpal tunnel syndrome from repetitive hand movements affecting touch sensation.
Okay, so that's deficits. What about sensory deprivation? It sounds empty.
It kind of is. It's not just no stimuli, but an insufficient quality or quantity of stimuli. Think reduced sensory input, like severe hearing loss, or eliminating patterns or meaning, being in a strange, unfamiliar environment, or just being in a restrictive setting, like long-term bed rest or isolation.
What does that do to a person?
The effects can be surprisingly significant. Reduced ability to learn, trouble problem solving, disorientation, even bizarre thinking, also boredom, anxiety, depression.
So mood and cognition are affected.
Definitely. And changes in visual and motor coordination, reduced color perception, less accurate touch. The really striking thing, these symptoms can sometimes mimic mental illness.
That's really important to remember. Okay, third one. Sensory overload. Sounds like the opposite.
It is. This is when a person gets too many stimuli, so many that the brain just can't respond appropriately or sort through it all.
Give me an example.
The classic one is the critical care unit, the CCU. Constant noise alarms, monitors, ventilators, people talking, bright lights day and night, frequent interruptions, procedures.
I can picture that. It sounds exhausting.
It is, and interestingly, the symptoms can look similar to deprivation racing thoughts, scattered attention, anxiety, restlessness.
So how do you tell the difference?
Context is key,
Right.
but also overload is very individual. What overwhelms one person might be okay for another. It depends on their fatigue level, their attitude, their general well-being at the time.
Wow, okay, so deficits, deprivation, overload. Thinking about Ms. Long again, her cataract is the deficit.
Right. Blurry vision, can't read or so easily.
But the nursing insight is bigger. It's seeing how that deficit connects to her fear of falling, her anxiety. That's where your clinical judgment as a student comes in, assessing the whole picture.
Absolutely. And many factors influence a patient's sensory function. It's not just one thing. Age is a huge one, obviously.
We talked about presbyopia and presbycusis.
Yeah, and with age, you also see things like increased sensitivity to glare, maybe reduced visual fields, impaired night vision, trouble judging distances, difficulty telling blues, violets, and greens apart.
And balance.
Proprioceptive changes, usually after age 60, definitely increase fall risk. Balance, spatial orientation, coordination, it all gets trickier.
Okay, age is big. What else?
Meaningful stimuli. This is so important. Things that matter to the patient: family photos, music they love, a calendar, a clock, maybe even a pet if possible. These can fight off sensory deprivation.
Especially in the hospital, right?
Definitely. Conversely, the amount of stimuli matters. Too much frequent vital signs, procedures, pain, noise from the hallway that leads to overload, especially if someone's already acutely ill.
Makes sense.
And don't forget social interaction, or the lack of it. Being isolated, maybe in a private room or due to infection control, can lead to loneliness, anxiety, depression. Human connection is a powerful stimulus.
Absolutely. What about their environment outside the hospital?
Environmental factors definitely play a role. Think about occupations, factory workers, airport staff exposed to loud noise, or welders risking eye injury. Even lots of computer work can lead to eye strain or carpal tunnel.
So work history is important.
Very. And cultural factors can influence access to care, like disparities in glaucoma screening or eyeglass use among certain populations. We need patient-centered care that addresses these barriers.
Okay, that's a lot of factors influencing sensory function.
Yeah.
So for the nursing students listening, how do we pull this all together in practice? Let's talk nursing process. Assessment first.
Exactly. This is where your critical thinking really shines. And the absolute first step is assessing through the patient's eyes. Meaning, you value them as your partner in care. Build rapport. Ask them what their concerns are, what's worked before, what hasn't. Patients can be hesitant to admit sensory loss, so trust is key.
Right. Don't just assume, ask, then what?
Identify people at risk. Older adults, yes, but don't just blame age. Consider meds, environment. Patients in confined settings like long-term care, or those acutely ill in places like the ICU. Assess their home environment too, if possible.
What kind of questions should we ask sensory alterations history?
Focus on the impact, not just is your vision blurry, but how does the blurriness affect reading your medication bottles? Or does it stop you from driving at night? Ask about onset, duration, contributing factors like their job, family history, when their last exam was.
And screening tools.
Yeah, like the HHIS for hearing. It's a quick hearing handicap inventory for the elderly screening version. Very useful.
Okay. What else in assessment?
Mental status. Observe their behavior, appearance, cognitive function, emotional state. Are they restless, having trouble concentrating, anxious? This can point towards deprivation or overload.
And physical checks.
A focused physical assessment. Can they read print, identify colors, hear you talking normally? Can they feel sharp versus dull touch? Recognize an object by feel, check for earwax buildup. Table 49.2 in the book has great pointers for this.
We need to check their ability to function day to day too, right?
Absolutely. Ability to perform self-care. Assess activities of daily living, ADLs, and instrumental ADLs, IADLs. Can they manage meds, cook safely, dress themselves? This helps identify needs and potential referrals, like to occupational therapy.
In safety at home.
Crucial. Assess environmental factors hazards. Look for those loose rugs, poor lighting, clutter, cords, lack of grab bars. In the hospital, is the call bell reachable? Are 5E poles easy to navigate around?
For Ms. Long, Diliana noticed the dim lights and throw rugs right away.
Exactly, that's part of the assessment. Also check communication methods, especially if they have existing issues like aphasia or use an artificial airway. How do they best communicate?
Good point. And social support.
Yes, assess social support. Who lives with them? How often do they see family or friends? And are they satisfied with that support?
What about things they already use, like glasses or hearing aids?
Assess use of assistive devices. Do they have them? Are they clean? Do they work? And importantly, do they actually use them? Just having a hearing aid doesn't mean it's being worn or helping.
Good, that's a thorough assessment. So Diliana gathers all this info on Miss Long: blurry vision, fear of falling, anxiety, the home hazards. Now what? Diagnosis.
Right, we analyze those cues. Often, the sensory alteration itself becomes the etiology, the cause, or a risk factor for other problems.
Like risk for injury.
Exactly. For Ms. Long, Diliana identified key nursing diagnoses: risk for injury related to her impaired vision and home hazards, risk for fall related to age, vision, and hazards, fear related to falling, and anxiety shown by her restlessness and poor concentration.
So what are we going to do about it? Let's talk planning and interventions.
Okay, planning and outcomes identification. We work with the patient and family to set goals. They need to be realistic, measurable, and patient-centered.
Examples.
Like, patient will identify and remove 3 home hazards by the end of the week, or patient will report feeling less anxious about falling within 2 risks. Safety is always the top priority in planning.
And it's not just us, right? Teamwork.
Absolutely critical. Teamwork and collaboration. Involve family, like Diliana involving Mrs. Long's son, Antonio. Make referrals home care, OT, PT, speech therapy, audiology, maybe community resources like vision or hearing centers.
So for Ms. Long, Diliana's plan focused on making the home safer to reduce injury risk, which would then help ease the fear and anxiety. And getting Antonio involved was key.
Perfect. Now, implementation. This is where we put the plan into action, aiming to empower the patient.
Where do we start? Prevention.
Yes, health promotion and screening is huge. Prevention is always best. Educate about eye safety wearing goggles for sports or certain jobs. Hearing protection, avoiding super loud concerts or using earplugs around machinery. Remember the 20-20-20 rule for computer use?
Yep, every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away for 20 seconds.
Exactly. And promote regular screenings, eye exams, hearing tests, especially for those at risk.
What about devices they already have?
Reinforce use of assistive devices. Proper cleaning of contacts and glasses. For hearing aids, teach cleaning, battery changes, address reluctance. Sometimes people resist due to cost, looks, or feeling like it just makes noise louder. Encourage talking to their doctor or audiologist.
How can we make the environment more stimulating but not too stimulating?
Good question. Promoting meaningful stimulation. For vision, maybe yellow amber lenses to reduce glare, good warm lighting using high contrast colors, black on white is easier to see, large print books, magnifiers.
What about color? You mentioned that changes with age.
Right. Older adults often see reds, oranges, yellows better than blues, violets, greens. Keep that in mind for signs or color coding. For hearing, amplified phones or TV listeners, maybe music with lower frequencies. If cerumen, earwax, is impacted, we can teach about using wax softening drops.
And taste or smell?
For taste and smell, good oral hygiene is key. Encourage using herbs and spices, maybe lemon juice instead of just salt. Pleasant aromas can be nice, but remove bad odors promptly. For touch, gentle touch, like back rubs, can be soothing. But if someone has hyperesthesia, increase sensitivity, minimize irritants.
Safety is a huge part of implementation, isn't it? Especially at home.
Paramount. Establishing safe environments. For visual loss, clear pathways are non-negotiable. No throw rugs, secure handrails, good lighting everywhere, especially stairs, mark step edges, consider ramps, and safe medication management, large print labels, maybe pre-filled pill boxes, or caregiver help.
What about other senses?
For reduced hearing, amplified or flashing alarms and doorbells. phone amplifiers, TDDT, T2I devices. For reduced olfaction, smell, working smoke detectors are vital. Check food expiration dates carefully. For reduced tactile sensation, extreme caution with heat and cold. Set water heaters lower than 120 degrees F max. Mark faucets clearly. Discourage heating pads. Do frequent skin checks.
Communication strategies are also key interventions, right?
Absolutely. Tailored communication. For aphasia,
Yeah.
be patient. Listen. Use simple questions, gestures, maybe pictures or a communication board. For someone with an artificial airway, use writing pads, picture boards, possibly sign language, or an electrolarynx.
And for hearing impairment, we touched on this.
Yeah. Get their attention first, face them, good light on your face, reduce background noise, speak slowly and clearly, lower pitch, not louder volume, rephrase if needed, use gestures. Written info helps too.
And for visual deficits.
Speak normally, identify yourself, use touch appropriately, explain actions, let them know when you're leaving. Braille or audio formats can be great resources.
What about patients in the hospital, maybe on bed rest or an ICU?
In acute care, focus on safety and reorientation. Address them by name, explain where they are, what you're doing. Simple explanations. For bed rest, encourage range of motion, self-care activities, conversation.
And controlling that overwhelming stimuli we talked about.
Yes, controlling stimuli. Organize your care to minimize constant interruptions. Schedule rest periods. Coordinate with other departments. Implement quiet time in ICUs, dim lights, closed doors. It really helps with sleep and reduces delirium risk. Minimize noise as much as possible.
What about safety measures during care?
Safety measures are key. If helping someone walk who is visually impaired, use that sighted guide technique. You walk a step ahead, they hold your elbow lightly, you describe the environment. Ensure the call bell and needed items are always within easy reach. Note their deficit clearly in the chart and maybe on the door or intercom system. For reduced sensation, reposition frequently and be super careful with any heat or cold applications.
And beyond the hospital, continuing care.
Restorative and continuing care focuses on adaptation. Help patients and families understand the sensory loss and find ways to cope. Promote socialization. Address that potential for loneliness. Encourage joining support groups, maintaining hobbies, maybe getting a pet. Focus on abilities, not disabilities.
I have self-care.
Promoting self-care independence as much as possible. For vision loss, teach the clock method for arranging food on a plate: peas at 6 o'clock, chicken at 12. Use adaptive devices. For touch issues, maybe zippers or Velcro instead of buttons. For balance problems, non-skid surfaces, grab bars, supervised walking.
Okay, that covers a lot of interventions. Finally, how do we know if our plan worked? Evaluation.
Exactly, evaluation. And again, start through the patient's eyes. They're the best source. Ask them directly. Did we meet your goals? Do you feel safer now? Is communication easier?
Compare back to the beginning.
Yes, evaluate patient outcomes. Look at your baseline assessment data. Have things improved? Has their ability to function and interact been maintained or gotten better?
Like with Miss Long.
Precisely. Diliana's follow-up showed the interventions worked. Antonio removed the rugs, changed bulbs. Mrs. Long hadn't fallen, her fear was down, and she was ready to focus on exercises. That's successful evaluation.
And if the outcomes aren't met?
Then you reassess and modify the plan. Ask more questions. Are you actually wearing the hearing aids regularly? Why not? What's still making it hard to join that discussion group? It's a continuous cycle of care.
This deep dive really highlights how fundamental our senses are to just being independent, feeling connected. As nurses, spotting and addressing these alterations isn't just medical care. It's about protecting dignity, preventing isolation. So here's something to think about. How might your careful assessment, your thoughtful interventions be the thing that shifts a patient's experience from feeling cut off to feeling empowered again?
It's a powerful role we play. We've covered the science, the types of alterations, the many influencing factors, and the entire nursing process from assessment through evaluation.
We hope digging into these core concepts from fundamentals of nursing gives you that practical edge, that confidence boost as you care for patients with sensory challenges.
Absolutely. The goal is safe, effective, patient-centered care, and understanding sensory alterations is a huge part of that.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope it helps you feel better prepared and more confident in your practice. From all of us here at the Deep Dive and the Last Minute Lecture team, thank you for being part of our learning community. Keep diving deep.